Character of the week.
Look, if you had one chance to come back from the dead, see your wife and kids, would you sell your soul or would you stay in hell? What would you do? You decide.
So if you haven't guessed by now, today's character week is Al Simmons, better known as Spawn. Al Simmons was a CIA operative, mercenary, assassin, that whole list of things with bad guys and guns and government. Basically, when he was killed in action, he was sent to hell. He made a deal with one of the Hell Lords at the time, a guy named Mel Bolsha, to see his wife, but the problem was that when he got sent back, he had amnesia, and it was 5 years after he had already died. Plus, he also came back as like some sort of like burned victim, rotting corpse looking thing. A guy named Jason Wynn. Actually, well, that's who was signed to his death. He was killed actually by his former best friend, a guy named Chapel. He comes back with this power, basically like what's it called, ectoplasm or some type of the green stuff that comes out of his eyes, mouth, and hands. One of his arch rivals, Violator. He meets up with a guy named Coxtilinisdios. I don't know how you say it. The white guy with a beard and a trench coat who was a former Hellspawn himself who ended up redeeming himself. So showing him that there is a way out. So basically he was torn between being good and being evil, and he's somewhere in the middle where he was fighting hell and he was fighting heaven because, well, he's a demon. That's what they do. He's a product of the 90s. I don't know how else to put it, because comics. The hyper-muscular traps and like big guns and spikes and chains and snarl and anti-hero. But despite all that, he actually has maintained a test of time to the point where he's actually over 300 issues currently right now, which puts him as probably one of the longer running characters of Image Comics. Definitely one of the flagship characters too. But speaking of Image Comics, Todd McFarlane, the creator of Spawn, is known for his work on Batman and Spider-Man, which if you look at Spawn is pretty much a good combination of both of them. Todd McFarlane has also creating Venom, which also leads to similarities to Spawn having a living costume. Because of his success with Spawn, he's also created Toy Line, which is hyper-realistic action figures, which pretty much is a big boom and savior of a lot of toy industries. Through that franchise, they've had a movie that made moderately successful box office smash. So Spawn movie was also featured Emilio Estevez's dad as Jason Wynn and some white lady as Chapel. No one was mad. The internet wasn't around back then, so there was no one to be angry about that. But I credit that for also being one of the first black superhero comic book films, starring Michael Jai White. It's also one of the first rated R comic book films. It predates Blade. Spawn, like I said, man, like he's also spawned, Spawn has also been featured heavily in an HBO, very adult-themed, graphic violence, nudity, cursing. I should have been watching it, but I did because, hey, HBO in the 90s, parents were asleep. They had a job to do in the morning. They weren't going to watch me. Another thing about Spawn, especially the HBO series, was it featured the father of Mary for There's Something About Mary. Sorry. No, actually it featured Keith David. You might remember him as the voice of Goliath, but honestly his voice is so recognizable. The moment you hear it, you know, like, ooh, that character's gonna be the shit. He also has been featured in several video games. Even more recently in MK11. He fights heaven and hell and he fights for himself. Anyway.
Like, share, subscribe.